Greetings, everyone. This is the Gardening Snail of Livingston, California, just trying to keep the community informed and local government as honest as possible. After several years of having fairly decent detailed written records of what transpired at City Council meetings, it looks like we are starting to slip behind a digital stone wall of written silence. Almost as if there are just some things we don't really need to know or remember. We'll talk about that a little later as we get into the October 5th, 2021 City Council meeting agenda packet. First off, Tuesday's evening's doings have been broken up into two separate agendas, a special meeting agenda and a regular meeting agenda, which on its face is kind of weird, unless somebody couldn't make up their mind on whether or not they were going to tackle these closed session items until after the regular meeting agenda had already been finalized. The regular meeting, by the way, set to start at 7 p.m. You can participate by phone by calling 605-468-8002, access code number 156811#. The meeting will be streamed on YouTube Live, and persons who attend the meeting in person are asked to follow the current state of California public health guidance. Persons requesting accommodation should contact the Deputy City Clerk at least 24 hours prior to this meeting at 209-394-8041, extension 121. Public comments can be submitted via email at citycouncil@livingstoncity.com. Comments must be received by 2 p.m. on the day of the council meeting. You will need to provide meeting date, item number, name, email, and comment. Please limit to 300 words or 3 minutes. Please include public comment in the subject for the email. I guess we'll just have to wait and see if any emails get lost or if emails that go more than 3 minutes are read in full. Regular meeting agenda begins with the call to order and the list below that, followed by citizens' comments, which are normally limited to 3 minutes, but not always. After that, it's announcements and reports, followed by the consent agenda. On the consent agenda, we have the waiving of reading an ordinance and resolutions again, followed by a resolution proclaiming a local emergency and authorizing remote teleconference meetings, a check warrant, minutes of meeting held on March 2nd, minutes of meeting held on March 16th, and we'll dive in a little more into some details on these meeting minutes. The second reading and adoption of the ordinance for new domestic wastewater services, that's normal to have a second reading on the consent agenda, followed up by the second reading of final adoption of ordinance for the establishing new rates for water service. That's also quite normal to be on the consent agenda. It should be noted that any of these items can be pulled by members of the council for separate discussion. Last on the list is an item continued from September 21st after well over 2 hours worth of discussion, the construction of a 480-unit 3-story multi-family housing development. Let's talk a little bit about that resolution proclaiming a local emergency and authorizing remote teleconference meetings. I picked out here where it says, whereas a required condition is that a state of emergency is declared by the governor. Let's pick out a few more details. Actual incident or threat of disaster or extreme peril. Required that state or local officials have imposed or recommended measures to promote social distancing. Whereas such conditions now exist in the city, specifically on March 4th, 2020, Governor Gavin Newsom proclaimed a state of emergency. Whereas there have been a significant increase in COVID-19 cases in Merced County, primarily due to the Delta variant of SARS-CoV-2. Whereas as a consequence of the declared emergency, we need to do something about it. So what are we going to do now that that 2020 state of emergency is still in effect? Let's see. It continues to directly impact the ability of members to meet safely in person, or state or local officials continue to impose or recommend measures to promote social distancing. and the city reserves the option to hold in-person meetings consistent with local health officer directives or to continue a practice of remote meetings that still allow multiple options for public participation. Therefore, the City Council is going to proclaim a local emergency to continue remote teleconferencing, and should be taking effect immediately upon its adoption, and shall be effective until the earlier of October 30th, 2021, or such time the City Council makes a subsequent finding by majority vote. Wait a minute, that sounds like the resolution was only going to be in effect for a few weeks. I wonder what they're going to do after that. Anyway, I went to the state's website on current safety measures, and it says, according to the California website, there are no county tiers, capacity limits, or physical distancing requirements. But COVID-19 has not gone away. To go safely about our daily lives, we need to keep taking steps to prevent the spread. So I'm still kind of wondering what the City Council really has in mind. Moving on to meeting minutes, starting with March 2nd. Under closed session, a potential property purchase to be used as the future site of a planned indoor-outdoor recreation center. No changes to the agenda. A report by the county supervisor, a presentation for proposed fire station, and a list of announcements and reports. Did you happen to catch that there is nothing there about what was reported? I've been going over meeting minutes since at least 2007, and what you are seeing here has not been the norm. Just like here, be it comments or reports, you're not given even the briefest summary of what was said. Same thing with the comment after the discussion about the mid-year budget report. And very little information about why the council decided to hire the accounting firm it did. Since the city is not collecting enough in fees in order to cover planning costs, I think a little bit more detail here would be nice. Now, the item about a dog park seemed to be important enough to rate a little extra space, although people making a comment did not. And it looks like no one was interested in being on the Measure V Sales Tax Citizens Oversight Committee. Moving on to March 16th. There was a Women's History Month proclamation, also a Cesar Chavez Day proclamation, along with a list of reports, but you wouldn't know the important topics covered because they're not included in the list. One would think for as long as this public hearing about modifying the current cannabis regulations went, that there'd be chock full of important information or interesting stuff that you might want to know about. But nope, basically just a list of who talked, but not what they said. And another list, and people responding to public comments, but not saying what was responded to, and a security information and responding to council questions, but no details about that either. So after a whole bunch of discussion, the details of which are not available here, the majority of the council agreed to send the item back to the Planning Commission. Citizens' comments with a list of the citizens, but no comments. I guess we're seeing a pattern here, aren't we? Consent agenda, amending the budget, proposed future development of 31 acres of land, a little on legal fees, and then a spay-neuter program discussion. And council discussion about the spay and neuter program, followed by the possible donation of water dispensaries by Alex McCabe, where they decided to look into it to see if it would work. And also decided that a future agenda item should be a discussion about the recreation fee schedule. Here are the proposed new rates for wastewater service and the proposed new rates for water service. The entire rate study is available in the agenda packet, and if you like, you can hit me up and I'll tell you where it's at. I mentioned that the very last thing on the agenda has to do with the construction of a 480-unit multifamily housing development, which was continued from the last council meeting. I want to touch briefly on why that was because it was not included in the staff report. There were a couple of sticking points between the council and approval of the project. One was the lack of an elevator to the third floor in the project. Another was the city's lack of a fire truck which would adequately serve the third floor in case of an emergency or fire. My understanding from all the discussion was that putting off this decision for a couple more weeks was to give the developer and the city time to work out some kind of compromise the council would be willing to swallow in order to approve the project. Guess we'll see how that worked out. Any views or opinions I express on these videos are my own and do not represent the views or opinions of the City Council or City of Livingston. Unless, of course, I am using direct quotes or video from City Council or other public meetings, then it's pretty obvious whose opinion is whose. Copies of source documentation available upon request.